The blind date was going nowhere until twin girls burst in and said, "My daddy's on his way." What followed wasn't just a love story, but the quiet beginning of a family nobody saw coming. Mark had never been the type to believe in love at first sight, or even in blind dates for that matter. But his sister Priya had worn him down with weeks of gentle teasing and firm insistence. "You're not getting any younger," she'd said. "And you'd spend more time talking to your blueprints than to actual people." So, reluctantly, he agreed. Just this once. It was a Thursday evening in early autumn. The air outside carried that crisp, golden feeling, cool enough for a light jacket, but still warm in the sun. Mark chose a small cafe downtown called the Willow Bean. It was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. It's the kind of place where people came to read or think, not to be seen. That suited him just fine. He arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window, watching the street. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, and a street musician played a soft tune on a violin. Mark tapped his fingers on the table, already rehearsing polite ways to end the date early if things went badly. Then she walked in. Lena wore a simple, green sweater and jeans. Her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked around once, then spotted him and gave a small, nervous wave. Mark stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his coffee. "Hi," he said, voice a little too loud. "You must be Lena." "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "And you're Mark." They sat. The silence stretched for a few seconds, just long enough to feel awkward. Mark tried to remember what Priya had told him about Lena. She taught kindergarten, loved gardening, and had a cat named Miso. He cleared his throat. "So, you teach little kids?" "I do," she said. 5- and 6-year-olds. It's loud, messy, and sometimes exhausting, but I love it." "That's nice," Mark said. He wanted to say more, but nothing came. He wasn't bad with people. Exactly. He just didn't know how to start with someone he didn't already trust. Lena stirred her tea slowly. "Your sister said you design buildings?" "Yeah, mostly homes. I like creating spaces where people feel safe. It's thoughtful," she said. Another pause. Outside, a couple walked by, holding hands. Inside, the cafe hummed, softly, coffee machines hissing, pages turning, someone laughing quietly in the corner. But at their table, the air felt heavy, like two strangers trying to carry the same invisible box without knowing how. Mark glanced at his watch. Only 20 minutes had passed, but it felt like an hour. He wondered if Lena was thinking the same thing. She kept her eyes on her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. She wasn't rude, just distant, like she was somewhere else in her mind. He thought about his last relationship. 2 years ago, his fiancée had left without much explanation. "I just don't feel it anymore," she'd said, packing her suitcase while he stood in the doorway, stunned. Since then, he'd buried himself in work, told himself he didn't need romance, but now, sitting across from Lena, he realized he missed connection, not just love, but real talk, shared silences that didn't feel empty. Lena looked up suddenly. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something to happen, but you're not sure what it is?" Mark blinked. "All the time." She smiled, a real one this time, small but warm. "Good. I thought I was the only one." Just as the conversation began to soften, the cafe door burst open with a gust of wind and 2 small voices shouting, "Miss Lena. Miss Lena." Before either adult could react, 2 identical girls dressed in matching pink jackets and scuffed rain boots skidded to a stop beside their table. Their cheeks were flushed, their eyes wide with excitement. One had a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. The other clutched a half-eaten granola bar. "Look who we found," the one with the rabbit said, beaming. Lena's eyes widened in shock. "Sophie, Maya. What are you doing here?" "We walked," Maya said proudly. "From the after-school place. We saw your car parked outside." "You walked?" Lena's voice rose in panic. "By yourselves? Across 3 blocks?" The girls nodded, completely unaware of the danger. Mark stood up instinctively. "Are they yours?" "No," Lena said quickly, already grabbing her bag. "They're my students. Their after-school program is just down the street. They must have slipped out." She knelt in front of them. Girls, you can't just leave like that. What if something happened? But we wanted to see you, Sophie said, hugging Lena's neck. And we missed Daddy. He said he'd pick us up soon. Lena sighed, but her anger melted into concern. She looked up at Mark, a mix of apology and helplessness in her eyes. I'm so sorry, this is not how I imagined tonight going. Mark, to his own surprise, smiled. Actually, he said, this is the most interesting thing that's happened all week. He grabbed his coat. Let me help you walk them back. As they stepped outside, the twins chattered non-stop about their drawing class. The squirrel they saw that morning, how Maya spilled paint on her shirt. Lena kept one hand on each girl's shoulder, her earlier stiffness gone. Mark watched Harrily for the first time. The way she listened, the way she corrected them gently, the way her whole face lit up when Sophie made a silly joke. This wasn't the woman from the awkward cafe date. This was someone real. Someone kind and just like that. The evening didn't feel like a failure anymore. As they turned the corner toward the community center where the after-school program was held, Maya tugged on Mark's sleeve. Mister, she said seriously, are you Miss Lena's boyfriend? Mark nearly tripped. No, not even close. But you should be, Sophie declared. She's really nice. And you're tall. Lena laughed, a full bright sound Mark hadn't heard before. Girls, that's not how it works. It could, Maya whispered loudly. Mark didn't answer. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't want the night to end. And then, as they reached the front steps of the center, a man came running toward them out of breath, eyes wild with worry. He dropped to his knees in front of the twins. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. The girls threw themselves into his arms. Daddy, they cried in unison. He held them tightly, then looked up at Lena and Mark, his expression shifting from panic to gratitude. Thank you, he said, voice rough with emotion. I can't tell you how much. Lena shook her head. They're okay. Just a little adventurous. The man stood, brushing leaves off his jeans. He was in his late 30s, with tired eyes and grease smudged on his forearm, clearly came straight from work. He extended a hand to Mark. I'm Daniel. Their dad. Mark, he replied, shaking it. Daniel turned to Lena. Again, I'm so sorry. The sitter got delayed and I was stuck in traffic. It's all right, Lena said softly. They're safe. Mark watched the exchange. There was history there, respect, maybe even friendship, but no romance. Just two adults doing their best in a messy world, as Daniel gathered his daughters. Sophie turned back to Mark and Lena. My daddy's on his way, she said, as if reminding them of something important. And in that moment, standing on a quiet street with autumn leaves swirling around them, Mark felt something shift inside him, not because of a grand gesture or a perfect conversation, but because of two little girls who ran into a cafe and changed everything. The blind date hadn't gone anywhere, but maybe, just maybe, it was about to go somewhere completely unexpected. The community center stood on the corner of Maple and Fifth, a low brick building with bright murals painted along the side rainbows, rockets and smiling animals done in the wobbly style of children. Inside, the air smelled like crayons, peanut butter sandwiches, and floor cleaner. A few kids still milled around, waiting for parents. While a tired-looking aide tried to coax a boy into putting his shoes back on, Lena led the way, her hand resting lightly on Sophie's shoulder, while Mark walked beside Maya, who kept glancing up at him like he was a new kind of superhero. Do you build castles? She asked suddenly. Not castles, Mark said, smiling. But I build houses. Real ones, where people live. Can you build one with a slide inside? Sophie called over her shoulder. Maybe, Mark said. If the grown-ups agree. Lena gave him a small, grateful look. She hadn't expected him to stay, let alone engage with the girls. Most men would have made an excuse and left the moment chaos arrived. But Mark hadn't flinched. In fact, he seemed interested. Daniel followed behind, still catching his breath. He kept one hand on each twin's backpack, as if afraid they'd vanish again. I swear, they've never done this before, he said quietly to Lena. I don't know what got into them. They saw my car, Lena said. They're clever. And they missed you. Daniel's face softened. Yeah, it's been a rough week. They reached the front desk, where the program director, a woman named Ms. Rivera, was pacing with a phone pressed to her ear. When she saw the twins, she dropped the phone. Oh, thank goodness. We've been calling your dad for 20 minutes. I know, Daniel said, rubbing his temples. My truck broke down near the bridge. Took forever to get a tow? Ms. Rivera sighed but didn't scold. She knew Daniel. Knew he worked double shifts at the auto shop, that he'd been raising the girls alone since his wife passed. Everyone in the neighborhood knew. Just. Maybe leave a backup contact next time? I will, he promised. Mark stood a little apart, not sure if he should stay or go. The moment felt private, but then Maya tugged his sleeve again. You have to meet Daddy properly, she whispered. He's nice. And he makes the best pancakes, Sophie nodded fiercely. With chocolate chips, Lena turned to Mark. You don't have to stick around, she said gently. I know this isn't exactly a date anymore, Mark hesitated. He could walk away now, return to his quiet apartment, play the awkward cafe scene in his head, and call the whole thing a loss. But something held him there, the way Lena's voice softened when she spoke to the girls. The way Daniel's hands trembled slightly even after his daughters were safe. The strange, warm knot forming in his own chest. I don't mind, he said. Really. Daniel looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. You're the one who found them? More like they found us, Mark said. They walked into the cafe like they owned the place. Daniel let out a short laugh, half exhaustion. That's my girls. Fearless. He extended his hand again. Thanks, man. Seriously. They shook. Mark noticed the calluses on Daniel's palm, the oil stains under his nails. This was a man who worked with his hands, who fixed things that were broken. There was something honest about that. Lena checked her watch. I should probably head back to the cafe and grab my things, she said. I left my bag there. I'll walk with you, Mark offered. And us. Sophie asked, eyes wide. Daniel crouched down. You two are staying right here with Ms. Rivera until I get back. No more adventures today, okay? But Maya started. No buts, Daniel said firmly, though his voice was kind. You scared me half to death. The girls drooped for a second, then nodded. Okay, Daddy. As Mark and Lena stepped back out into the cool evening, the silence between them felt different, now lighter, easier. The pressure of the date was gone. In its place was something real. Shared concern, a little chaos. And two little girls who'd somehow stitched them together. You're really good with them, Mark said as they walked. I've been teaching for 8 years, Lena said. But those two, they're special. Their mom passed away last year. Cancer. They don't talk about it much, but sometimes they act out like today. I think they just needed to feel close to someone who cares. Mark glanced at her. You care a lot. She shrugged, but her eyes glistened. It's hard not to. They're full of light, even when they're scared. Back at the cafe, the barista handed Lena her bag with a knowing smile. Everything okay? Yeah, Lena said. Just a little detour. Outside again, Mark hesitated. So what now? Lena looked toward the community center. I should check on them. Make sure they're settled. I'll come with you, Mark said again. And again, it felt right. When they returned, Daniel was sitting on the steps, head in his hands. The twins were inside, coloring quietly at a table. Ms. Rivera gave them a thumbs up through the window. He looks wrecked, Lena murmured. They sat beside him on the cool concrete. For a while, no one spoke. The streetlights flickered on overhead. A bus rumbled past. Somewhere, a dog barked. Finally, Daniel exhaled. I keep thinking I'm doing okay. Then something like this happens, and I realize I'm barely holding it together. You're doing better than most, Lena said softly. Daniel looked at her. You've been amazing with them. Ever since Sarah? You've been like a second mom. Lena shook her head. I'm just their teacher, Daniel insisted. You're more than that. They light up when they talk about you. Mark listened, feeling like an outsider, but not in a bad way. It was like watching a quiet truth unfold. These three people were already connected. He was just arriving. Then Maya pressed her face against the glass, waved wildly, and held up a drawing. It showed 4 stick figures holding hands under a giant sun. One had long hair, Lena, one wore glasses, Daniel, one was tall, Mark, and 2 tiny ones in the middle had pigtails. She drew us, Sophie said, appearing beside her. Daniel's throat worked. He stood and went inside. A moment later, he came back out, holding the drawing carefully, like it was made of glass. Mark looked at it, then at Lena. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. I should go, Mark said finally. You all have a lot to sort out. But as he turned to leave, Sophie ran out and grabbed his hand. Don't go yet, she pleaded. Daddy's making pancakes tomorrow. You can come. Daniel didn't say no. He just looked at Mark, waiting. Mark thought about his empty apartment, his silent dinner, his plans to watch a movie alone. Then he thought about chocolate chip pancakes, crayon drawings, and 2 little girls who believed, without a doubt, that he belonged in their picture. All right, he said, just for pancakes. Lena smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes. You won't regret it. And as they stood there under the amber streetlight, the evening that had started with awkward silence and lukewarm coffee had somehow turned into something tender, messy, and full of possibility. Mark didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. The next morning, Mark almost didn't go. He stood in his kitchen, coffee in hand, staring at his reflection in the dark window. What was he doing? He barely knew Lena. He'd only just met Daniel. And yet, the image of that crayon drawing sports stick figures holding hands kept playing in his mind like a quiet promise. But then his phone buzzed. A text from Lena, * they're already setting the table. Pancakes in 20? You in? He typed back, on my way. * Daniel lived in a small, slightly crooked house on the edge of town with a front yard full of mismatched toys, a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree, and flower boxes spilling over with late-blooming marigolds. The screen door squeaked as Mark pushed it open. Inside, the smell of butter and maple syrup wrapped around him like a hug. Mr. Mark, Sophie shouted, sliding across the kitchen floor in her socks. Maya appeared behind her, holding a plate stacked high with golden pancakes. Daddy says you sit here, she announced, pointing to a chair already set with a bright blue napkin and a glass of orange juice. Daniel stood at the stove, flipping another pancake with one hand while stirring coffee with the other. He wore a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair still damp from a shower. Glad you came, he said, nodding. These 2 haven't stopped talking about you since last night. Lena was at the sink, washing strawberries. She turned and gave Mark a small, warm smile. Morning. Breakfast was loud, sticky, and full of laughter. The twins argued over who got the pancake with the most chocolate chips. Daniel told a story about a customer who tried to pay for an oil change with a bag of homemade cookies. Lena mimicked the way one of her students pronounced elephant as effluent, and everyone laughed so hard Maya snorted milk out her nose. Mark found himself relaxing for the first time in years. There was no pressure to impress, no careful dance of dating. Just real people, real mess, real joy. After breakfast, while the girls played in the backyard, the 3 adults sat on the porch with mugs of coffee. The sun climbed higher, warming the wooden planks beneath their feet. So, Daniel said after a while, you and Lena, how long have you been seeing each other? Mark almost choked. We're not. Last night was our first time meeting. Literally a blind date. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Didn't feel like a first date. It wasn't going well, Lena admitted, stirring her coffee. We were both nervous, stiff, like 2 mannequins at a tea party. But then we saved you. Sophie yelled from the yard where she was pretending a garden hose was a dragon. Mark chuckled. Yeah, you 2 were the best interruption ever. A comfortable silence settled. Then Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Look, I don't mean to pry, but I have to ask, what are your intentions? Lena's eyes widened. Daniel. No, it's okay, Mark said, holding up a hand. He met Daniel's gaze. Honestly, I don't know. I came for pancakes, but I like your daughters. I like how Lena is with them, and I like that you're trying your best, even when it's hard. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Fair enough. Lena looked between them, something thoughtful in her expression. You know, before last night I hadn't been on a date in over a year. Why not? Mark asked. She hesitated. My fiancé left. Not because of anything dramatic. Just said one day, I don't think this is working. Packed his things while I was at school. Never really explained why. Mark felt a pang of recognition. Yeah, mine did something similar. Said she needed space. Then. Moved in with someone else 2 weeks later? They exchanged a look to people who understood. The quiet kind of heartbreak that doesn't make noise, but leaves deep cracks. Daniel sighed. Sarah didn't leave. She stayed, fought, until she couldn't. He looked out at his daughters, now chasing each other around the tire swing. Cancer took her slowly. By the end, she could barely whisper. But every day she'd say, take care of our girls. And don't forget to live. His voice cracked. I'm trying. But some days, living feels like too much. No one spoke for a while. The wind rustled the leaves. A bird called from the oak tree. Then Maya ran up, breathless. Daddy. Sophie fell off the swing. She didn't fall, Sophie yelled, stomping over. I jumped. Daniel stood, ruffling both their hair. All right, adventurers. Time for quiet time. Books for 30 minutes. Groans followed, but they obeyed. Dragging blankets and picture books to the living room. Back on the porch, the mood had shifted. More honest. You're a good dad, Lena said quietly. And you're a good person, Mark added. Even if you burn pancakes. Daniel laughed. Hey, that was one time. And it was during a thunderstorm. The power flickered. They talked more then about work, about grief, about how hard it is to trust again after loss. Mark learned Daniel had grown up in foster care. Never knew his real father. Swore he'd give his kids the stable home he never had. Lena shared how she'd almost quit teaching after her breakup, but stayed because her students gave her a reason to get up in the morning. Mark told them about his dream of designing affordable homes for single-parent families, something he'd never admitted to anyone before. You should do it, Daniel said. I know a few folks who could use a place like that. I know kids who'd love a backyard like yours, Lena added. It felt strange. How is Lee they fit together, not as a couple, not even as friends yet, but as three people who'd all been carrying heavy things alone, and suddenly found others willing to help hold the weight. Later, as Mark helped Lena load her car with a bag of extra pancakes for dinner, Sophie insisted. She turned to him. Thank you for staying. For pancakes? He teased. For seeing us, she said softly. Really seeing us? He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. As he drove home, the morning sun glinting off his windshield. Mark realized something. He hadn't thought about his ex once today. He hadn't checked his work emails. He hadn't felt that familiar ache of loneliness. Instead, he'd laughed until his stomach hurt. He'd watched a little girl proudly show him her rock collection. He'd seen the way Lena's eyes crinkled when she smiled. He'd heard Daniel hum an off-key lullaby while washing dishes. None of it was perfect. The house needed paint. The pancakes were slightly burnt at the edges. The conversation had touched on pain more than joy, but it was real, and real, Mark thought, was better than perfect. That night, as he lay in bed, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from Daniel. The twins asleep on the couch, curled up under a blanket. The crayon drawing pinned to the fridge behind them. The caption read, They asked if you're coming back. Mark typed a single word. Yes. He didn't know what this was, friendship. Something more, or just a strange, beautiful accident. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't in a hurry to label it. He just wanted to be part of it. Weeks passed, and what began as a single chaotic evening turned into something steady and quiet. Mark didn't show up with flowers or grand gestures. He showed up with tools Daniel had mentioned, almost in passing. That the neighborhood playground was falling apart, trusted swings, splintered benches, a slide so wobbly the city had taped a "do not use" sign to it. Most parents just avoided it. But Mark couldn't stop thinking about it. One Saturday morning, he pulled up to Daniel's house in his pickup truck, the bed loaded with lumber, paint cans, and a toolbox. "I figured," he said when Daniel opened the door. "Still in pajamas, if I'm going to keep eating your pancakes. I should earn them." Daniel blinked, then grinned. "You're fixing the playground?" "With your help," Mark said. "And maybe Lena's, if she's free." She was. By noon, the three of them were at the park, measuring, sanding, hammering. The twins ran around with paintbrushes, helping by adding bright handprints to the new bench slats. Neighbors stopped to watch. A few even joined. Mr. Chen from the corner store brought cold drinks. 2 teenagers offered to dig post holes. What started as a favor became a community project, stitched together by shared effort and the sight of 2 little girls laughing as they tested the newly secured swing set. Mark and Daniel worked side by side, their rhythm easy. Daniel knew how to level ground. Mark knew how to design safe angles. They didn't talk much at first, just nods, hand signals, the occasional "pass me the drill." But by the 3rd weekend, they were joking about bad coffee and worse exes. Lena came every afternoon after school, usually with a bag of sliced apples and granola bars. She'd sit on the edge of the sandbox, grading papers or reading aloud to the twins, but her eyes often drifted to Mark, watching the way he wiped sweat from his brow with his forearm, how he patiently explained to a curious boy how screws held wood together. She noticed things, like how he always made sure the slide faced east so kids wouldn't squint into the sun, like how he saved the smoothest piece of wood for the handrail because little hands deserve kindness. One evening, as the sky turned peach and lavender, Lena stayed behind after the others left. Mark was tightening bolts on the climbing frame. She walked over and handed him a water bottle. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. He took a long drink. "I know, why did you?" He looked at her, really looked, because it felt like something good. "And I've been avoiding good things for too long." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat on the fresh wood of the new bench, patting the space beside her. He joined her. The park was quiet now, just the rustle of leaves and distant traffic. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about us." Mark's chest tightened. "Yeah, I like you, Mark, more than I expected to. But I'm scared." "Me too," he admitted. "What if we mess it up? What if it gets complicated with Daniel, with the girls?" He thought about that. Maybe it's already complicated, but maybe that's okay. "We don't have to figure everything out today," she smiled. Small, but real. "Just, let's not rush." "Deal." Meanwhile, Daniel watched from a distance. Not with jealousy, but with something quiet, or hope maybe, mixed with caution. He'd seen how Mark looked at Lena, and he'd seen how Lena's shoulders relaxed when Mark was near. But he also saw how Mark treated his daughters with patience, with respect, never trying too hard to win them over. That mattered more than romance. One rainy Thursday, Daniel invited Mark over for dinner, just the 2 of them. The twins were at a sleepover. Lena was grading papers at school. Over bowls of chili, Daniel stirred his spoon slowly. "You care about her," he said. It wasn't a question. Mark nodded. "I do. And the girls. They're part of the package, aren't they?" Mark said gently. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Daniel exhaled. "Sarah would have liked you." Mark didn't know what to say to that. So he just said, "I wish I could have met her." "You kind of have," Daniel said, pointing to the photos on the wall. Sarah holding newborn twins. Sarah gardening, Sarah laughing with flour on her nose. She loved this house, loved those girls more than anything. And she believed people could find each other again, even after loss. Mark looked at the photos. Did she ever doubt it? "Every day," Daniel said, but she tried anyway. The next week, Lena started tutoring Sophie and Maya twice a week after school. Their reading was strong, but math gave them trouble. Mark sometimes dropped by with takeout, sitting quietly in the corner while Lena used buttons and toy cars to explain addition. He never interrupted, just listened, watched. One night as he helped pack up, Maya looked up from her worksheet. "Are you going to marry Miss Lena?" Mark froze. Lena turned red before either could answer. Sophie added, "Because if you do, you'll be our uncle. And uncles get to come to birthday parties." Mark knelt down. "I don't know what's going to happen," he said honestly. "But I do know I want to keep seeing you two. And your dad, and Miss Lena, no matter what." The girls seemed satisfied with that, but later, walking to his car, Lena stopped him. "That question. It's going to keep coming." "I know," Mark said. "What do we tell them?" He thought for a moment. "The truth. That we care about each other. That we're figuring it out. That families don't always look the same, but they can still be full of love." She looked at him, her eyes soft in the porch light. "You're really good at this, you know." "At what?" "At being human," he laughed quietly. "I'm just trying." And that was the heart of it. None of them were perfect. Mark still forgot to text back sometimes. Lena got anxious when plans changed. Daniel snapped when he was tired. But they kept showing up for the twins, for each other. For the quiet moments that slowly became something more. One evening, as they all sat on Daniel's porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, Sophie leaned against Mark's shoulder. "I'm glad you came that day," she whispered. "Me too," he said. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who were becoming his, Mark realized he wasn't just building a playground, he was building a home. The invitation came on a Friday afternoon, slipped into Mark's hand by Maya as he helped her tie her shoelaces after soccer practice. "Daddy says you have to come," she whispered, as if it were a secret mission. "It's a camping trip. Just us." Mark unfolded the note. In Daniel's messy handwriting, it read, *Lake Pinaview. Saturday morning. Bring a sleeping bag and your sense of humor. The twins insist. He showed it to Lena later that evening as they sat on her porch, sharing a bag of slightly stale popcorn. She smiled. They've been planning this for days. Packed their own backpacks, mostly stuffed animals and gummy worms. "You going?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "Someone has to make sure Daniel doesn't try to cook over the fire again. Last time, he nearly set his socks on fire." Mark laughed, but underneath his stomach fluttered. This wasn't just another weekend project or a casual dinner. This was deeper. A step into something undefined but real. Saturday dawned cool and clear. Mark arrived at Daniel's house just as the sun crested the rooftops. The truck was already packed. Tents, cooler, fishing rods, and a mountain of snacks. The twins bounced in the back seat wearing matching explorer hats and binoculars. "Took you long enough," Sophie called. "I had to find my lucky marshmallow stick," Mark said, holding it up like a sword. Daniel clapped him on the shoulder. "Glad you're here." The drive to Lake Pinaview was filled with songs, silly riddles, and Maya's endless questions about stars, bears, and whether fish get lonely. Lena sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at Mark in the rearview mirror. Each time their eyes met, something warm passed between them, not words, just quiet understanding. At the campsite, they worked together like a well-rehearsed team. Daniel and Mark pitched the tents while Lena helped the girls gather smooth stones for a fairy circle. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees, a small fire crackled in the pit, casting dancing shadows on their faces. Dinner was simple hot dogs, corn on the cob and beans from a can, but it tasted like a feast. The twins told ghost stories they'd clearly made up on the spot, complete with dramatic whispers and sudden jumps. When Sophie pretended a raccoon was stealing their marshmallows, Maya screamed and dove into Mark's lap. He held her gently until she giggled and wriggled free. Later, as the sky turned deep indigo and the first stars appeared, they sat in silence, wrapped in blankets. The fire popped softly. Crickets sang. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. "It's beautiful," Lena said quietly. "Yeah," Mark said, but he wasn't looking at the sky. He was watching her the way the firelight caught in her hair, the peaceful curve of her smile, Daniel leaned back on his elbows. Sarah loved nights like this. She used to say the stars were proof that even in darkness there's light. No one spoke for a moment. The memory hung in the air, not heavy. Just present, like Sarah was sitting just beyond the firelight, smiling. Then Maya yawned hugely. "I'm sleepy." "Me too," Sophie mumbled. "Already leaning against Lena's?" Sighed. They tucked the girls into their tent with promises of pancakes in the morning and warnings not to sneak out to talk to the owls. As the soft sound of their breathing drifted through the thin fabric, the three adults returned to the fire. Mark stirred the embers with a stick. "I used to think love had to look a certain way," he said slowly. "Two people, a ring, a white picket fence. But this feels more real than any of that." "Right." Lena nodded. "Because it's not about perfection. It's about showing up." Daniel looked at them both. "I don't know what this is," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to lose it. Any of it." Mark met his gaze. "You won't." There was no grand declaration, no dramatic kiss under the stars. Just three people, honest and tired and hopeful, choosing each other not as replacements for what they'd lost, but as companions for what was ahead. The next morning, they woke to mist rising off the lake and the smell of coffee brewing over the fire. The twins emerged from their tent, hair wild, eyes bright, demanding pancakes. As Mark flipped batter on the griddle, Lena handed him a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away after breakfast. They walked down to the water's edge. The lake was still mirroring the trees and sky like glass. Sophie skipped stones while Maya held Mark's hand tightly. "Do you think we'll come back here?" she asked. "I hope so," he said. "Every summer?" "If you'll have me." She nodded seriously. "We will." On the drive home, the twins fell asleep in the back, heads leaning against each other. Daniel drove with one hand, the other resting lightly on the wheel. Lena dozed beside him. Mark watched the road unspool ahead, a golden afternoon light washing over the windshield. He didn't know what the future held. There would be hard days, missed birthdays, arguments, moments of doubt. But there would also be pancake mornings, playground repairs, bedtime stories, and quiet evenings under the stars. Back in the city, they unloaded gear in comfortable silence. At Daniel's front door, Lena turned to Mark. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not trying to fix us. For just being here," he smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." Daniel shook his hand, then pulled him into a quick, firm hug. "Family doesn't always come in pairs," he said. "Sometimes it comes in threes. Or fives." That night, Mark didn't go straight home. He sat on his porch, the lake still in his clothes, the sound of laughter still in his ears. His phone buzzed a photo from Lena, the five of them standing by the fire, arms around each other, smiling like they belonged. He saved it. Not as a promise, but as a reminder. Love doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it walks in with twin girls who say, "My daddy's on his way," and stays because it finds a place where it's needed. Wanted, and finally, truly home. And that was enough. More than enough.